How do you think we can combat Christian nationalism? That's a great question. So that really gets into kind of like the crux of my work. I mean, it goes beyond spreading awareness. Like there's a lot of just like, you know, like social media activism that's just spreading awareness. And I think that is really crucial in the resistance against any authoritarianism or any tyranny in our lives and around the world. Because again, like even on a personal level, learning about some of these very important topics via social media has helped inspire and inform myself, right? So I don't really like it when people just blatantly shit on like information spreading as a form of activism, because our phones, our algorithms, our digital footprints are already tools of authoritarianism, and that our algorithms are specifically manufactured to keep us distracted. Our algorithms are specifically manufactured to create an echo chamber so that we never develop our own critical thinking in order to see the multiplicity of the human perspective. So I actually do think a large part of using digital connectivity on a globalized level as a tool of spreading accurate information and combating media illiteracy is actually incredibly important work. So I actually do push back when a lot of, I mean, there is a justifiable nature of, hey, by the way, like spreading information on social media is only half of the battle. And the other half is on the ground's work, is showing up and being a body at a protest, is doing organizing amongst your own community as much as you can, whether that be setting up some mutual aid situations, whether that be just getting to know your neighbors on a human, personal level. Neoliberalism has us all so individualized. Western society is propped up as this ultimate form of a system of society, and in reality, the way to combat a lot of the competitive pitting against each other is to connect with each other on a human-to-human level, get to know your neighbors, get to know their kids. All of that is super important. I always like to say that awareness spreading, as far as like, you know, sharing information online, kind of lights the torch of activism, and then the in-person organizing carries that torch. And so I think they both go hand in hand. So as far as how to combat Christian nationalism, which I think is a great question, I think it kind of goes into with those two parts, the information awareness and then the on the grounds kind of activism. And my area of expertise, what I'm good at, what I'm am currently successful in, as far as like how quickly we're building this community online, is the awareness spreading part. And that personal and like that part of spreading the awareness about Christian nationalism and how it is a very serious threat to our way of life, even for Christians eventually, because that is how authoritarian regimes are able to consolidate power and control, right? Part of my work specifically on that front, on that awareness spreading front, is in two parts. It's to speak to the people outside of these environments, these red states, basically, these very evangelical, Christian-centered zones that are very real pockets around this country where Christian nationalism right now is very much like in its guinea pig blueprint era. And the administrations on the state levels here are trying so hard to enact real theocratic, the merging of church and state initiatives and policies. And I'm here to tell people who are not living in these red states, like, hey, this is the blueprint, this is the guinea pig. It's going to happen on a federal level if we don't tame this religious fanaticism, this religious extremism and fundamentalism now. So I think that part of my work is to speak to people who aren't as affected specifically by Christian nationalism right now, to warn them, to mobilize them, to say, hey guys, we need to take serious action against the rise of Christian nationalism, because I'm fucking telling you, if we don't get a handle on this now, it's going to get to the federal level, and it's already there on a federal level, right? But not to the extent that it exists in red states. And my concern is that going forward, like with all of the other things going on in the world, like I was just talking about, with all of the other things happening in this country, I think Christian nationalist policies are going to swoop in kind of more subtly and be enacted on a less charged and like polarizing level, because the majority of people in this country are still Christian. They still identify as Christian, even if maybe they're not as super far right, or maybe they're kind of like trying to distance themselves from MAGA supporters specifically, right? And like that kind of like cult of personality following Trump and worshiping Trump, the ground Trump walks on or whatever. I think that there are a lot of Christians who are trying to be more progressive. So in a lot of ways, the specifically Christian nationalist policies are not always as charged, are not always as polarizing as some of these other really intense news stories and current events that are happening right now, specifically looking at the ICE raids that are bullies over in they're happening everywhere around the country, just so that they can fill their arrest quota, right? Whether or not they're not even specific, only or limiting their work on only arresting illegal immigrants at this point. They're arresting pretty much anyone who's brown. And so that is a really charged and polarizing and newsworthy story, right? And there is a lot of, obviously, like white nationalist, Christian nationalist agendas behind people supporting what ICE is doing, of course, but it's not as openly Christian nationalist, because it's a little bit more real world and materially occurring than the more subtle behind the scenes force of this growing movement of Christian nationalism. So that is something that I try to speak truth to, so that people can start to be aware and kind of keep an eye on the rise of Christian nationalism, which I think will be one of the biggest downfalls of all of the human civil liberties on a person-to-person level, like on a working class level, right? The other reason I do this work, the other really, really big, important reason I do this work, to answer your question about how we can combat Christian nationalism, is to speak to those Christians who are maybe leaning a little bit more progressive, or maybe they're just really feeling uncomfortable with how much Donald Trump is being worshipped as a savior figure, and that doesn't align with their values. They think that even if their basic stance is like, that's not very biblical. But even more specifically, I'm speaking to the people who are looking around at evangelical Christianity, especially white evangelical Christianity here in the United States, and they're recognizing like, hey, this is fucked. I don't think I align with this anymore. I don't think this is appropriate. I think this is maybe even not true or realistic to believe in Christian mythology anymore. And they're starting to look around and wake up to a lot of the manipulative tactics of preaching from the pulpit, of Christian dialogue and rhetoric and messaging that is 100% intertwined with political initiatives behind the scenes, as we have covered extensively on this channel. And so the other part of the work that I do here is to speak to those Christians and say, hey, it's okay. I've been there. It's very difficult to kind of come to terms with the fact that maybe not only as an adult, like, because I left evangelical Christianity at 21 years old, right? And so that's still kind of a baby, and I did not spend a lot of my adult years, like as an adult, furthering evangelical Christianity. And I already have a lot of guilt and shame surrounding some of my beliefs as a teenager, like as far as like thinking that homosexuality was a sin, the white supremacist undertones of being raised in a white evangelical Christian church. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have a lot of guilt and shame for that now. I can imagine that as someone my age at 33 years old, who's kind of looking around and realizing that white evangelical Christianity has a lot of harm built into its ideology, how much guilt and shame is kind of wrapped up in that coming to an awareness of the ludicrous nature of this ideology. And I just very much I do think that I want to be there for those people as well who are kind of ready to step away. Maybe they're a little bit afraid of losing their community. Maybe they're a little bit afraid of what reality can really be like, what their life can really be like on this side of that belief system. And so really, that's a really long way of answering your question about how we can combat Christian nationalism. I think it's just to continue doing what we're doing, to showcase that you can be a moral, a fulfilled, and a mentally sound person on this side of evangelical Christianity and Christian nationalism.